all about writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 5, part 2 of our series on the business of writing. I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher.
And I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter. And today we're going to be talking about working with an editor. This is a big topic. I've gotten a lot of questions about it over the years from authors, often saying, do I need an editor? And no matter what situation they're coming to me with, no matter who they are, generally the answer is yes. Yes, you do. And don't take that as an insult. Any of you aspiring authors who are sitting out there, we all benefit from an editor. And so we're going to talk about why. How do you work with an editor? What does an editor do for you? What kinds of editing are there? These are the topics we want to dive into today about editing. So I'm going to throw out there that first question, and Sara, ask you what you think about why does every author need an editor?
Well, speaking as an author, I know for a fact that even if your manuscript is grammatically correct and very clean, you need another set of eyes because every author is too close to their story and they can't see if there's something structurally unsound or if there's a hole or a plot point that was missed or a character's arc just doesn't flow well or scenes are choppy. As much as you fall in love with your stories and your characters, you're going to want at least one, if not many, sets of eyes to help you see the story from a clean point of view. And, for me, my books go through sometimes, I don't know, upwards of 4 different editors. My agent will weigh in. I'm even working on books now that have development executives on the TV side who are weighing in as I'm writing. And everybody will always have an opinion. And you have to remember that editors, unless it's like the period belongs here and the apostrophe there, and that's word is spelled wrong, a lot of what editors are going to say is subjective, but sometimes it's more objective than not. And you need that more than the subjective stuff. And, I know we both have, war stories from working with many editors. And, I consider myself a relatively, I'm not a messy writer. My first drafts are usually pretty decent. All things you've read them, Ben, you know what I said. But I have had editors in the past. Um, one of my books that I sent to Craig, who is one of my very kind of big strokes editor, and this was a second or third book that I had ever sent him, and he came back with, "This is the weakest thing you've ever written."
Hmm.
And it was a blow. I was like, "How? I have books published, or like, what do you mean? I'm not a bad author." But he wasn't wrong, and I remember deleting 110,000 words and starting over on page 1 blank.
Wow.
'Cause that was the best way to tackle it, and sent him the first 100 pages and was like, "Now am I at least on track?" And he came back and he goes, "This is the strongest thing you've ever written." And,
Wow.
in a way, as hard as it is to percolate all of that and get feedback and pages back of notes, I mean, then you very gently come back with some of my stuff and you're like, "Well, if we could just move this here and change this in a couple of scenes," and by the end of the conversation, you're like, "So I just essentially told you to rewrite the entire book."
That just happened once. It was just once, but
But the thing is, they're always better books,
yeah.
and you'll never be a successful author if you cannot be collaborative with people, because you're gonna have to do that the whole way, and to do it with grace, and do it with an open heart and an open mind, even if it means killing some of your darlings.
Mhm.
Always be stronger.
Yeah. This is definitely something that I've seen in many aspiring authors is because, like you said, they're really close to their work. They poured their heart and soul into this book. They love it. They can be very closed to any kind of feedback. About this character doesn't really belong here. I don't understand why they're in the book. Oh well, I'm not telling you to get rid of that character. I'm just telling you the way it's written right now it's not working. And like you said, an editor can see the book through different eyes. The editor cannot read the author's mind. So the author might read a scene and go, oh yeah, well, that's what that means. But they don't realize how many assumptions they're bringing. And the editor will read it and go, nope, that's not what that means. What you actually wrote is this. And what did you mean? Okay, well then let's work on how we can get what you actually meant to come out on the page. And yeah, like you said, editors are subjective. That's true. And editors are not always right. I have certainly had disagreements with editors about what to do. But you have to come into it as an author with a sense of professional responsibility. Like, okay, I am dealing with a professional here who probably has more experience than I do. I should definitely listen to what they say. And even if I don't like their suggestion, there's a reason they made that suggestion. So maybe I should dig into that a little bit more and find out what isn't quite working with how I wrote it. I mean, I've certainly had an editor basically rewrite an entire scene for me. And it's frustrating because he didn't get what I was trying to do. He made an assumption about what I was trying to do. And so he rewrote the whole scene to reflect that. I had to go back and say, no, you missed it entirely. Clearly, I didn't explain it properly. So let's go back and work that. But I'm not going to take your suggestions because they're wrong. That's not where I want to go. But I will still rewrite the scene to make my vision come through clearly. And I know a lot of times I've had aspiring authors tell me, oh yeah, well, my, fill in blank of relative or friend, is an English teacher or is a journalist or is some other profession, a librarian, which is somewhere around writing. I'm like, well, that's great, but they're not a professional editor. And I'm not saying their opinion isn't valid, but if you want to be a professional author, you have to engage with professionals. And that, yes, that will often mean having to pay them. We can talk about that another time, but you have to pay for professional service if that's the level of support that you want. And also friends and family, honestly, they're probably not going to give you the best advice. Most of them will just say, I love it. It's amazing. Wow. Whether they think that or not, because they don't want to criticize you, because it's hard to do that. Or they may come in with their own opinions and tell you how to rewrite the book, but that's just their opinion, right? What credibility do they bring? So it's fine to have beta readers. I have them. It's fine to ask, friends and family for opinions, certainly when you're starting out. But eventually you've got to just bite the bullet and get a professional to look at your book. And you got to be ready for what they're going to say, because you're not necessarily going to like all of it, but it's probably valuable. And even if you don't take their advice, you have to think about why they gave you that advice and maybe rework something to make it better. But as Sarah said, your book will inevitably wind up better having been reviewed by a professional editor, whatever path that takes. But yeah, let's share some fun stories here, shall we? I remember my first big New York book. I was all excited, made this big deal, big New York publisher, big New York editor. I even went to New York, and he met me at the Algonquin bar in Midtown, and the whole big Arthur thing, and we're having a great time. But he was determined that I should not use metric units in my book. And of course, I'm writing sci-fi. It's based 500 years in the future. It's a fair assumption that most people are going to be using metric by then. But he said, no, the American audience will not accept that. And I think that's a bit of an insult to the American audience. But also I said to him, well, I'm not sure I buy that, because NASA uses metric. Star Trek uses metric. I'm pretty sure they'll be okay with it. And it came down to his argument was that at the close personal level, he said, if you say that something is 3 feet away, it has a very visceral feel to it, 3 feet. If you say 1 meter, well, most Americans won't know what 1 meter is. And so you'll kind of lose that closeness. I'm like, okay. I hear what you're saying. So let's compromise. And so I said, why don't we, when we're talking about, interstellar distances, I'll use metric, right? Because I guarantee you nobody can tell what 600 million miles feels like compared to 1 billion kilometers. Okay. Nobody is going to be sort of upset by that. But if it's personal distances, I won't use units at all. I'll say like arm's length or a couple of paces, or I'll use some other way to describe how close they are. And we did eventually work it out. But I'll tell you, I thought there was a moment in that Algonquin bar when my editor was going to come over the table at me. He was furious that I was not switching to Imperial. So anyway, he had a point, but he took it a little too far. So eventually we found a nice compromise and it all worked out. So there you are. There's a good example.
You know what though? And I think that's what makes a good editor so worth their weight in gold in a way, right? Because they care about those details and the minutia sometimes, because they're the ones who would notice it in a book anyway, right? And so they're going all the way there, and everybody behind that will just love it fine. But if it holds up to their exacting standards, you're going to have this wonderfully perfectly organized book. I love I love some of the notes I got back from my editor that I had on Tinsmith, because he really went into researching some of the archaic words that I used and had way too much fun finding the usage of some of and some of the words I used are not commonly used nowadays. You really have to dig and find, sources from hundreds of years ago to go, oh, that's what that means. And I loved reading because he had a ball. He even put the notes in, in the side there, and kind of gave me the rundown of how he found the definition of this one word I was using, and it was his own aha moment. And I thought to myself, see, this is something that a good editor will do.
Mm-hmm.
How long did he spend on that one word? The one word, just to make sure I wasn't misusing it, and I knew I wasn't, because it's my trade, but it was awesome to see somebody care that much. And I think as tricky as it is to work with an editor at times, they really have the best interest of you as an author and the book itself. They want something beautiful to go out into the world, especially if they're going to be touching it. They truly viscerally are not going to be mean to be mean. They're helping you articulate and bring your vision out into the world in a way that they feel is even not necessarily better, but a little bit more polished.
Mm-hmm.
And to begrudge that because you don't want to do the work to go back in, or you don't want to change, is really just hurting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that's
I mean, as putting my editor hat on, because I have done quite a lot of editing, that was always the approach that I took. Was, okay, this is the author's story. What is their story that we're trying to get out here? And I may not agree with everything that they do creatively, but that's not my position as an editor. Change that. Is okay, well, maybe I wouldn't have had the character go that way, but you're going with something here. I just want to make sure it makes sense, And as an editor, the way I've always seen it is, an editor is there to bring the author's vision into greater clarity. Like the author has the vision here. The editor is there to make sure it's clear. If there's something confusing, something doesn't make sense, something's extraneous, something just isn't working, the editor can see that and can help it out. I know when I finish one of my books, I wasn't quite happy with it, and I didn't know why. It was okay. Like everything was there, but there was something missing. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to send it off to the editor and see what she says. And she came back, and she was oh so polite. She said, "You're such a talented author, and I just think that if we do a few things, this book will become the amazing book it can be." So, okay, so you're right. I'm missing something here. And then she laid it out in like 2 paragraphs. You need this, this, and this. And it was like a veil had been lifted from me. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what this book needs. It's so clear now. but I, as the author, could not see it because I was too close to it. Give it to my editor, one pass. And she's like, yep, this is what it's missing. Do these things and this thing will come alive. And I did. And I went and made those changes to the book, and I'm very happy with it now. So, editors can do amazing things for you because they have the experience, they have the knowledge, and they are generally as in love with your book as you are. They really get on board with it, and it means a lot to them. Like Sarah said, like doing that much research to make sure that word is done right. It's because they care. So yeah, that's why every author needs an editor, is because you need that professional to be your cheerleader and your coach at the same time, to make sure that your book comes out the best it can be. But that said, you're still the author, and you still get final say. I did see a tweet once from an author friend of mine, which is great. She just wrote, "Stet," she wrote, "drunk with power," because "stet" is what you can say as an author when you get to an edit and you don't like it. You just say "stet," which means, nope, don't make that change. Leave it the way it is. So there she was as the author saying, no, "stet, stet." And she was drunk with power. You still have the final say. Don't feel like your editor has the final say. No, you do. You as the author can choose to ignore their advice as long as you understand why you're ignoring it. So I want to make that really clear in the relationship here. The author is still in the driver's seat, even if it's a big New York editor. You as the author are still in charge. I know because I called my agent and asked him, when I get the first round of edits from my big New York book, like, I don't like a lot of what he's done here. So who's actually in charge here? He said, you are. I'm like, okay, I am. So knowing that, we worked it all out.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit too. Speaking of editors, we've said it very broadly, but I would love for you to just touch, if you could, for our listeners, on the different kinds of editors and editing, so that we can, expound on each one separately in a future podcast. But I think letting people know that there are different kinds is important too.
Yeah. That's a really important point. Thanks, Sarah. Because as an aspiring author, when you go looking to hire an editor, you have to make sure you hire the right kind of editor. And generally I would say there's 4 different kinds of editing that you should look for. The first one I would call like a manuscript evaluation, which is really high level. And that is where an editor will read your entire book and they'll give you some feedback. They'll probably write you a letter, 5 to 10 pages, just with their thoughts. Big picture, this worked, this didn't work, this is appropriate, that you might want to rethink. It's just to sort of give you an overview so that you can go back and make the edits yourself. With a manuscript evaluation, the editor won't actually touch your text. They'll just give you their opinion of it. And that's the least expensive way to get editing, but it's a great way. Like if you're on a reduced budget or you're just not sure what you need, a manuscript evaluation is a great way just to get that feedback. Am I fooling myself, or am I actually not a bad author, and why? So when you get into the actual editing itself, though, there's sort of 3 levels. The biggest one is structural, or sometimes called content editing. And again, it's big picture. It's where the editor will tell you the big moving parts in your book and say, okay, your opening is really strong, but then chapters 4, 5, and 6, nothing really happens in there. So we need to work on that. Or this whole series of flashbacks that you got, it's not jiving. Maybe we should consider actually telling them as a prologue instead of flashbacks, like as an example. That these are things that I've had to deal with as an editor before. It's the big picture stuff. Are all the characters relevant, and are they all doing their job that they need to do dramatically? Does your plot make sense? Does it work logically to a conclusion that is satisfying? And when you get there, everyone goes, of course, it's inevitable we got here. Or do you have these whole subplots that go off in different paths that don't do anything? That sort of thing. That's structural editing or content editing. That's one level. The next level down is what a lot of people think editing is. It's called stylistic editing or line editing. And that's when the editor is working sort of paragraph by paragraph, line by line, looking at your flow of your words, the choice of the voice that you're using. Is it making sense from one paragraph to the next? Are you doing abrupt, like, point of view changes? Are you not explaining something properly? Are you too much description here? Right, it's right down on the page. It's that level, and that's where you'll get a manuscript back marked up all over the place with things crossed out and suggestions put in, and that's what many of us think editing is. Well, that's actually called stylistic editing or line editing, and that's where a lot of the meat of editing comes from. It's intended to make sure that your voice comes through clearly and that your scenes flow well and that everything sort of works and there's no jarring things that's going to pull the reader out of the story. And then finally, the last kind of editing is copy editing, also called proofreading, which is the last check. Once all other changes to the book have been made, all dramatic changes, story changes, they've all been done, it's one last go over to make sure that everything is spelt properly, make sure that all your grammar is proper. I mean, you can break the rules of grammar, but make sure that it's done in a way that you mean to do it. Make sure you haven't used the wrong version of the word there, or you haven't missed out the word not. Let me tell you, that changes the meaning of a word a lot if you forget to write the word not. Yeah, my editors always pick me up for that. It's funny how I guess the not is assumed. I guess I just figure everyone's going to go with me on that. But copy editing is that last check, just to make sure there's basically no typos and nothing that's going to embarrass you when the book goes to print. So when you are thinking of hiring an editor, make sure to find out what kind of editing do they offer, because not every editor can do all of those. I'll guarantee you, I am not a copy editor. A proofreading, nope, I am the worst. I will probably insert problems into your book if you ask me to do copy editing. That's just not how I'm wired. Structural editing, that's where I live. The big pieces, making sure it all comes together, that's where I'm happiest. But other people are the exact opposite. Really, persnickety, detail-oriented. I will look up the definition of that word to make sure it's correct, right? You need them too. Different kind of editing. So yeah, when you're thinking of getting an editor, make sure you get the right kind. Otherwise, you'll be paying a lot of money for a service you may not actually need.
Thank you. I think that was brilliant. It was like, in a nutshell, it's all in one place. I hope that that's going to be helpful for a lot of our listeners. It was helpful for me too, even though I've worked with a lot of these different editors and different phases. And what you just said at the end, though, on a lighter note, where you're wired not to be a proofreader, copy editor, and other people are, obviously, and you're more of a structure content editor. I know that I live in the line editing place. I am an awesome editor. I can read published books and I can go, they overused that one word. Like, they just did that word like 4 times in the past 7 pages, and then they don't use it again the entire book. Like, that's too much of an echo. That should be changed. And I do that with published books, famous published books, or I catch, misspellings or things in huge tomes that have been published for a long time. And I'm like, oh, and I mean, not that my books are perfect either, but I can see it, or I sense echoes really quickly and things like that. And I wonder if there's some sort of test out there, like, what kind of editor would you be? What
Yeah.
4% editing types?
Yeah, that's one of the being a professional editor ruins you for reading books. It really does. So yeah. Anyway, that's our cross to bear. Fine. Yeah, cool.
Well, then I think on that note, I'm going to wrap us up now that you've shared all of those highbrow things that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in depth in multiple episodes, one by one, and bringing in other editors and their opinions and their expertise and tidbits of advice. But otherwise, I think that's our show for today. And I want to just remind everybody that they shouldn't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these chats and nuggets and of information. And feel free to leave a review. It helps us a lot. And don't forget, you can find Ben at ben@arcoles.com, as well as on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can catch up with Sara at sarahdahlman.com and on Instagram. thanks for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics that you'd like us to cover. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.